Yanku's just finished, still got to defend his PhD as for now. Alan's joining Microsoft Research in New England after that. He's done amazing stuff in scientific discovery, learning, including publishing in Nature, a whole lot of other stuff. And he's also been extremely active in organizing scientific discovery workshops and science. So made some huge contributions to the community. And so thank you for being here. And take it away. Actually, just before you start, I'll just say Yanku will be here this afternoon. There's I think 1 or 2 slots still left if people want to chat with him later on. There's a sign-up sheet on the calendar invite. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for the extremely kind introduction. So yeah, I'm Yuanqi, and I'm finishing like final year graduate student from Cornell. Still have 10 days to go, and I'm super excited to share like the line of work that I've been pushing like since 2 years ago. How we are thinking about large neural models and in general like agents for salinity in scientific discovery. Okay, so I guess I have to start with this, but I guess for this audience I don't have to convince you that the agent has been changing our lives from lab to coding and many more. But the topic today is like, could they transform science? And around 2 years ago or before that, since the release of ChatGPT, there been a huge interest from the scientific community in evaluating how well they're doing for a science problem. And this was a report from Microsoft Research. They are based on expert evaluation on a list of categories. And you can see there are thumb up and crying face. It's very much qualitative. And the second one was a very common one as well, based on computational and experimental database. And you can see again here, they're just comparing the rankings between different types of models. These were very old, from 2 years ago. And the performance highlight, they're showing like a non-satisfactory, competitive, slightly competitive than the accuracy and so on, right? So without really helping the scores. And third one was based on competition and exams, which, number, varies a lot across different models. But my point trying to make is that when I start thinking about this problem, I look at those benchmarks and I interact with ChatGPT, my feeling was that there was no conclusive answers. Clearly, those models knows a lot of science knowledge, but I didn't think the question answering and all those ways was the right way to think about this problem. So that draws my attention to it. And so I want to first give a very much simplified workflow for scientific discovery and the computational formula. So usually we start with some scientific inquiry. And for example, we want to find a new drug that kills certain bacteria. And so take a computational perspective that tells us a hypothesis space, or we have to define hypothesis space. We are thinking about small molecule-based drugs. Then the space automatically becomes space of molecular structures. And because we are doing empirical science, we have to be able to validate the hypothesis to do experiment, either simulations or even some machine learning predictors that train over experimental data or wet lab validation. And those things help us derive observables, understand the hypothesis space better, and we have to go through this workflow iteratively until we are lucky enough that we find what we want. So, however, to reflect the scientific discovery workflow, I was considering an alternative approach to evaluate whether a language model knows scientific knowledge. And the goal was, can we extract knowledge from language models? So since if you can extract knowledge from language model, then you show they know they have the knowledge, right? And this is rather ill-defined for computer scientists, I think. So what is knowledge, right? So how do we make sure it is knowledge, right? So is this a hard thing to find, or is it just like spitting out like right away if you ask it? And so we need a better problem formulation. And it's very simple problem formulation would be a search opposition problem, right? So how do we search scientific hypotheses with language models? And so you see, and how we approach this was very simple. And thanks to AlphaEvolve, this gets very popular. It was a very simple evolutionary algorithm, and there's a few reasons why we start with it. So from current hypothesis, you can start with some, as I said, some scientific inquiry. You have some hypothesis-based search, and you can initialize your current hypothesis space with your prior from scientists, or just code start from language model outputs. And you use language model as a heuristic to do that, right? And you propose a batch of new hypotheses, and you score them, use your objectives, and you do some selections. You keep the good ones, and this is a very simple evolutionary algorithm. And the reason why we choose evolutionary algorithm was evolutionary algorithm leveraging language model from language model to new hypothesis part. Language model are autoregressive models, so you got to take advantage of their sampling capabilities. You don't want to just keep revising on a wrong objective, spending a lot of time conditioning on that thing, but you do want to sample a lot of objectives, hypotheses, and evolving them together. And we've tested, and now the goal shifts, right? And going back to the two questions. So what is knowledge? So knowledge now becomes the scientific hypothesis. How do we make sure they are non-trivial, right? So it's kind of easy that, we have strong classical approach in searching those hypotheses. If they are very hard to find, you find something much better than them. Other than that, you already know the answer, which is likely not the case for many of the targets. You make sure those are the knowledge you are looking for. And if you give us strong evidence through that, at least myself, I'm convinced that it has strong scientific knowledge. So the first example we show is with small molecules. You don't have to know anything about chemistry materials to understand. So they look like this, but we are not doing a multimodal model. This is 2D. So the two language model, they really look like this long chain of strings. And we basically just starting with, okay, there are very well developed benchmark for this. This was a problem that since deep learning become popular, I think 2017 people already started building models and previously using computational optimization, Monte Carlo tree search, different type of search algorithm for this. And it's a very hard benchmark. This is a benchmark very hard to beat. They have like around 25 targets with 30 baselines, and some of them are very strong. I only highlight the best ones here. And one is RL based, and the other is like a graph-based genetic algorithm, which is also an evolutionary algorithm. And the third one is Gaussian process and Bayesian optimization. And what we show is just GPT-4. So that was like, I don't know, it was like 2 years ago, the model. And we beat this benchmark to a large margin, right? Of course, we did a lot of other things with this paper, but that's the takeaway I want to show. So it's just language model and evolution algorithm. You can solve like optimize molecules very well, find molecules very well, depends on different targets you're shooting. Well, that was surprising to a lot of people already. But so I wanted to level it up. So how can we make this problem more challenging and still computationally verifiable? And the second problem we picked is crystal structure. So they look like this. So they're in 3D and they're highly symmetric, right? And to language model, they look like this. So it's basically a file of 3D coordinates. They're floating points up to certain positions. And here, what we validate through is, okay, so just a quick walkthrough on whether the property you care about in materials, you care about how thermodynamically stable they are, and by measuring that, you have an existing database of what the composition you observe in natural world, and for those unknown composition, you do a convex Hall approximation towards the energy, and if you're below that energy, you're kind of like you roughly say it's a novel new material that are thermodynamically stable, and we validate through more expensive quantum mechanical calculations, which are the norm of the community does this. And there are 3 models. They are specialized models trained over those 3D coordinates, leveraging their symmetries, right? Based on autoregressive models, diffusion models, and so on, including one was published in Nature called Metagen. And with Llama 3.1, this was Llama, of course, the strongest, like the 70B, Llama 3.1. We showed much stronger stability rate than the others. And this was even more surprising to me because I didn't think language model could be able to generate such symmetric things in digit by digit through floating point. But of course, it wasn't like straight out of language model generation. For evaluating this bar plot percentage I show here, all the method does a bit of relaxation because the energy are super sensitive. If you generate the digits a bit wrong, even 3-4 digit like 0.0001, it could still affect the energy, right? So, but everyone does a relaxation, but in reality, we tested how much relaxation helps in terms of energy. It's not a lot. For half of the generated structures, they don't relax. They only relax a little bit. So that was nice, and I wanted to even test it a bit further. So now this is a problem very similar to mathematical reasoning. And it's called synthesis pathway design. So the idea is that you have molecule structures. Here I show as a target. So you consider this as the Lego pieces, right? So you're trying to break it down. So you have a list of actions to break it down. you go it backwards. In reality, you do it forwards. You want to construct it, doing this bottom up. You want to take the building blocks. You have a list of them, maybe at the scale of 10,000 state space that you can pick, and you go not state space, but like a basic unit, and you construct them with another like around 10,000 scales action space that you construct them, and you get output. In the end, you want to know. Since in reality you go backward, you want to make sure your leaf node on the tree or DAG to be in that building block set. And this
Sorry, just because you're moving pretty quickly. So the problem here is you're given a target molecule and you're trying to come up with a pathway that will let you synthesize that molecule.
Yes,
Given a set of precursors that are available to you.
exactly.
Thanks.
Question. So in all of these examples, you do have a very objective way of getting a signal that whatever the sample that you're making, like whatever the solution that you're sampling is correct or not.
It is correct. Only the most information just come from the objectives, the reward that you're getting. Well, of course, you have to describe the problem a little bit to kind of like activate that part of knowledge, but you don't do super like evolved things.
And these rewards are defined by the domain itself.
The objective.
Yeah, sorry. The objective is defined by the domain itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, different domain have different objectives.
Right.
Yes. So and to language model, what this look like is this. It's a bunch of JSON files that representing this direct acyclic graph, basically. And classically, this problem is like tree search problem. Like Monte Carlo tree search has been the state of art. Well, sometimes with A-star variant search, people have been doing. But if you compare with, but of course, this action space is huge, right? As I said, 10,000 scales. And what people do in practice is use a neural network to learn a classification, to use that probably to guide those search, which makes a lot of sense. And under the same budget I'm showing on this bar plot, you can solve, well, if you give it a decent amount of budget, you can solve a lot of the instances, right? So because search algorithm works. And when we tried, of course, now we are progressing a year. So we have GPT-4o. Maybe I think GPT-4 wouldn't be able to solve it. But with GPT-4o, what we observed is that initially, what we did was using GPT to predict the one-step action, to pick one action out of the 10,000 scale action steps and put it inside the search algorithm. That barely solve anything unless those three to 5 steps reactions. And for your reference, those the percentage or solving rate I'm showing here are like longer steps, but not extremely long, like 8 to 10 steps. 8 to 10 steps that are either like those red dots that I showed on the left, red arrows. And that basically, just achieve on par result. And what we did later on to improve it was we do the evolutionary algorithm on the entire DAG. So we generate the whole path together, and then we refine the path instead of like generating one action and then refine one action. So I have some intuition for this, because generating one action, refine one action could be like conditioning on a bad answer. You can condition on a very bad answer, and you keep adding in, you never move anywhere. So you spend a lot of search budget there, right? So instead of you generate the whole thing, you just, fast rejecting a lot of very bad paths, and you quickly convert it to the, whatever space that you're looking for.
When you say refining an action, do you mean looking at similar actions to it? Or?
Exactly. So you connect it with your tree search algorithm.
Yeah.
So language model predict what action to pick next and get a result if this is valid, and pick a new action in that way, like a local step. Yeah. And that was altogether, that was almost running out of my toolkit to test them computationally. And I started thinking about them more seriously, because initially I just want to give the community a strong message. It may not be very conclusive that you say language model cannot do science, right? So especially 2 years ago. And through working with them, I start seeing, well, I'm only showing a fractional result, but of course we also validate more on, if you start thinking about how you actually use them in practice, what are the scenario you will do and how do you validate, right? And together with some collaborators, we kind of like zoom, in this idea a little bit. Okay, why don't we build a benchmark together? Because there are a lot of benchmarks. They are not built by the scientists. They're general, like, and also even the community's last exam, it was kind of like crowdsourced, and there are people have been complaining there are a lot of mistakes. There are a lot of problems made arbitrarily hard to trick a graduate student, right? A well-trained graduate student. So what we were thinking about is, can we route the evaluation in terms of what scientists really do day to day, right? So we first split out to different disciplines. And then we define that we have a group leader, like a different level group leader. There's a domain lead, like a discipline leader, and there's a project sub-area leader. And then we define the research scenarios, roughly like around 10 research scenarios under each one. And we realize those questions. So this is a collective set with more than 1,000 questions with, many scientists involved, really involved, going back and forth several rounds to make sure, to try our best to make sure that the problem are appropriate to test. And of course, we further did a bit more with what I just showed. How do we search scientific hypothesis? But I'll talk about it at last. Probably the result. Well, many of the results might be very intuitive, like what we have already in mind. I'm not going to talk anything about the first plot. Basically, first plot tells you a later version of the same model almost always improve on the earlier version. And you see a lot of variance across different fields, biology, chemistry, materials, and physics that we tested across different model providers, which is we are also not unclear why that happens. But if you look at the bottom plot that I'm showing here, this is predicted for GPT-5. If you look at the general science questions like GPQA and MMU, AME, and the SVU bench verified, and you can still see like for general science related questions versus specialized science questions, there are still gap exists in those frontier models. Go ahead.
Could you go back to the last slide and could you explain a bit on what you mean by discovery ability?
What do you mean here? Sorry, where did
You said
discovery ability.
Yeah.
Okay, I probably should just remove that. So I'm just saying that it's just a specialized data set. I'll talk about that in the end. It's probably not proper to be here. Yeah.
Do you feel like this data set is more geared towards scientific discovery?
Yeah, I think they would benefit more.
So if I remember right, it's still fairly factual QA pairs, but they're drawn from the workflow that scientists use. Is that right?
That's right. So for some of the research scenario, for example, you want to analyze some spectrum plot to understand their structures of what it came from. Yeah, we still do kind of like a templated version.
Right.
Taking how much they can analyze those plots. Those usually they're not doing very well. Yeah. But I agree. Yeah, still a QA based, single question, Q&A, like single answer or multiple choice, and yes. But it's just made, more specialized by scientists, basically. That's the first part. And some of the things that we would anticipate for sure is that scaling or more reasoning works, but they show like diminishing returns through time, of course. And what's interesting on the third plot here is that this is a difference between a GPT-5 and GPT-03. So it's a later model and an early model. So below the dash plots on the negative values are there are actually some scenarios that your later model works worse than your earlier models, which people have spotted this somehow, but this is more quantitative that you can actually see that happens. Since we don't know what happened to the model training, so we can only evaluate it from the evaluation.
Can you go back?
Sure.
Again, I'm trying to understand how you're doing the evaluation.
Sure.
One thing that we've found to be important is the need to control for computational cost when doing these things. I see something kind of like that with how much reasoning effort,
Sure.
low, medium, high, but I don't know what that means. I see, you're looking at different model sizes, but model size isn't really a good proxy for expense. Why not evaluate, accuracy versus cost?
That's a very good question. Yeah, so we didn't do that. So like for the model size argument would be since we, that's a good point. So I think versus cost versus accuracy is another step ahead of just trying to see, okay, what the best the model can do. So here,
There's also different agentic platforms you can put on top of the base language model or other strategies like
we didn't
running voting, but it all comes down to cost, really.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. I think, if we would have more resource, we should try to add that. But, the point that we're most like, we feel like we also need the early steps, and that was like, just try what's the best this model can do. But I agree. We should have tested the cost. Yeah, cost constraint. And we also want to just, because we were just a bunch of, well, I was not a scientist, but I'm not a scientist, but just imagining like a scientist just curious about something about those models, right? So that's like, the plot here shows the correlations where you make mistakes, like what question you get right or wrong across different models, and you do see some decent correlation because across models. And in the next plot, I'm going to zoom in this to show you a bit more research scenarios where they actually did make similar mistakes. But here, what's interesting is that if you look at the chemistry and physics, okay, I won't go back to previous plots, but there were actually the model did the worst. And the biology and materials where the model did the best in terms of the percentage they solved it. And there were less correlation on those compared to the model did the worst. That's some interesting observation. And if you zoom in this a little bit, there are basically two research scenarios we picked to demonstrate where the green basically means those are the questions. These are two research scenarios, like transition metal complex property prediction and the microorganic framework synthesis. And the green dots means the question they got right, and the right means the answer they got wrong. And you can see no matter, the left one is like they got many of them wrong, and then the right one is like they got many of them right. But under both, you can see the patterns that they got question wrong are quite correlated. And the last part went back to that discovery or the design argument that I was talking about in the first part of my talk. So so this part actually I lead myself. So I basically find a group of people to kind of like scale this up. And what's the hypothesis search argument holds across more problems, right? So for example, we tried it on protein sequence design and some gene editing. And the retrieval synthesis I talked about, and the molecular optimization I talked about, and transition metal complex optimization search, and the crystal structure I talked about, and solving Ising models, which are almost always like a combinatorial optimization and a symbolic regression with LLM, SR, and so on. So there are a couple of things to notice here is that first, like on general cases with language model compared with the state of art search algorithm, or not exactly the extreme state of art, but like a decent baseline domain algorithm specific to that problem. Most of the times, language model already outperformed them with language model as a proposal in genetic in allergy algorithm. And well, there are also cases, for example, in retrieval synthesis. Well, the example I showed previously that outperformed or on par with language model, but here we kind of like truncate everything in the cost a little bit, and under that criteria, they are no longer outperforming. For example, molecular tree search, and there's no unanimous trend across language models in solving those problems. But on average, you can observe that DeepSeek wasn't a shining one in previous evaluation in QA, but it kind of quite does a bit better or noticeably better on average than the other things here. And also, you can notice there are still questions that language models are not solving well enough compared to the baseline models. But that's what basically, just to strengthen our confidence a little bit on language models' capabilities to extract significant hypotheses across field. All right. So the summary for the first general parts that I want to show. So strong scientific knowledge emerges in large language models. I hope that I've expanded by what it means. I don't want to just throw that argument. That may sound very arrogant. And the sampling or search that I'm arguing is one approach that quite effectively extract them across different tasks. And the question after that, we were thinking about like, okay, so what I've shown has no automation baked in it, right? So it's basically just treating language model as an autoregressive model that gives you a better hypothesis from past hypothesis. You don't have to think about anything it likes a human to understand. But we do want automation. Automation is a great thing to have. And again, I'm going back to the scientific discovery workflow that I showed. I said it's super simplified, and it is, right? Because discovery is not well-posed optimization problem, right? I think I also watch a talk from Peter that he called it outer loop. So the idea is that we don't have, well, maybe sometimes you can argue in computer science or mathematics, you have an exact verifier that gives you, tells you if you solve the problem. But in science, that never happens. Well, no matter how well you do, even in that lab, it's not exact. It has a lot of uncertainties. And so if you don't know what objective you're the entire set of objectives are optimized, then it's not well-posed optimization problem. And humans, what human scientists do day to day is that to try out a couple of designs, hypotheses, and test them, and then look at them and think about what we should do next, right? So that's what scientists steers those directions. And okay, could AI agent help? So that was the question we are trying to ask and hopefully answer. So we realized agentic system. This is the first agent work that I've been trying to do. Is that again going back to the scope, find a new drug that kills this bacteria. On the right hand side is the optimization part. Okay, I call it optimizer for the reason of we call it this paper. That's what I've shown you. So once you give an objective, we can optimize this quite well with either evolutionary algorithm or other search algorithm. But the real question is that who defines the problem, right? So who translates from the goal to the computational tractable objectives that we can actually run to search for problems. And we want to realize this into a language model-based AI agent systems, which we call it SAGA. And yeah, so this is how SAGA looks like. And I'll break it down. So once a goal comes in, let's say I want to find a antibiotic that kills a certain bacteria. So what human do is like first reason about that objective, right? So what are the objectives? Like what are the computational tools I can leverage, or even experimental measurement I can leverage to achieve that goal, to define and achieve that goal, right? So that's what basically the planner is doing. And also another important factor I want to highlight is that not only specifying the objectives, but also specifying your preference over them. Because in reality, we are almost always solving a multi-objective optimization. And this is not an easy one. This is a very easy objective from goes to 10 to 20, which you have no ways to solve, to enumerate a solution. And the preference not only decides, how your energy landscape, also decides if your optimization algorithms are able to get to them. And my favorite part, the coding agent, right? So once you decide what objective to pursue, you have very strong implementation agent that can help you to realize them to computational tractable functions that you can use in your optimization algorithm, in the optimizer part. And after you have done the optimization, and this is another thing that just human scientists do day to day, is that you look at the results, you analyze the optimization results, and you provide feedback. You think about what can go wrong. For example, you may have hacked the reward, the objective function that you give it in, and to generate some bizarre structure of this molecule. And you can say, okay, let's add some penalties to that structures. That's what human scientists do as well. And there's another view. I look at this, like I call it, I'm not sure if I can call it that way, but I really find it intuitive. I call it the optimizer part, really like thinking fast, because what you do is like you don't do anything. You just solve optimization problem given the objectives. It's very well posed. And the left-hand side part, or the auto loop here in our case, we call it reasoning slow, is that you have to be analyzing your results and thinking about reflecting on what you should do, and even code it up so to automate this process.
That's a quick question. So in the goal, to what extent does the goal give you the objective function?
That's a very good question. So the goal give you, for example, let's say the goal is high level. What I say was
the goal is kill the KP
kill the
bacteria.
KP bacteria, but you can equip it with, okay, this is for predicting the activity, but it doesn't tell. What it implies is like need to be a drug. It need to be able to synthesize, not just kill it, but you need to be synthesized. It need to have a it's not toxic and so on. So it doesn't imply the entire space of objective, but it does provide you something.
The thing seems a little bit backwards to me is the analyzer part, because that analyzer part just seems like a language model, and apparently there is no feedback coming from anywhere else. So how does it look like? For example, you plan something, you basically created a rubric, and that's what you're saying, and then coded it up so that you can computationally sort of use an optimizer to optimize for that rubric, and then you get a solution, and then you analyze with respect to what? Like, what's the fidelity of that analyzer?
Yeah. So very good question. So you analyze it's an agent, right? So you can search for you can write code. So you can analyze the statistics across optimization algorithm. For example, when your optimization algorithm doesn't give you a satisfying answer, like candidates, so you have to analyze if its optimization algorithm simply fails, or what you should be focusing on. Right? So it gives you a report essentially.
Right, but it feels like the way your diagram feels like the analyzer is actually giving the feedback to the planner, which is saying that your rubric was wrong in the first place.
Yes, exactly. And we need to change my rubric. I need to change my objectives.
But how do you know that? Like the rubric was wrong? Like
Well, I'll give you an example. For example, I'm optimizing something like with some biological interactions. I can optimize that very well, but I can generate very bizarre molecules with heavy metal atoms or stuff, right? So and your analyzer would search through internet or use its knowledge or just verbally speak out. And that didn't happen in practice. You should put some penalty on those. And planner will take it out, right? So just say, okay, let's just plan to add that objective. And what's its weight?
Couldn't you add that objective from the start?
Well, that's another good question, right? So that kind of like we don't want a human to be like, well, there are two arguments I can give. I agree. So ultimately, you can have human to design everything from the beginning. But my point of view is that so there's no golden set of objective you can specify from the beginning. You have to look at the result, and you have to take into account if you are able to find those objectives based on the weights. Right? So even if you have a sense of golden objective, which a scientist will do, throw them in. And maybe the way you combine them or the preference you put just doesn't lead the optimization algorithm to get it. That's what people are solving with LLM fine tuning, right? So we design the reward function, right? So if you think about that way, that's an infinite space that you should, and that super critical in the computational perspective to the results. Right. And as you can see, the reason why we built this was like we are building this very bottom up. We just want to add one little automation at a time, right? So we have 3 modes, so we don't do fully automated. So we have the first mode, very obvious, just called Copilot mode, just help scientists write code. Right? So scientists can do everything and just write codes, boost their computational workflow. And the second one we call it, semi-pilot in a way that and in reality, it actually does. It's like the analysis. Well, the analyzer agent sometimes provide surprising results to the surprise scientist, but most of the time it does not. Or sometimes it also hack. It tells you just add more nitrogens to the molecules and stuff, make it explosive. And but anyway, so it does help when you have human kick in at different steps, and it's super interpretable and controllable in my opinion at least, because it's the way that human be handling, and we tested a different level of automation. And the last part, of course, we call it autopilot. It's basically, just throw in Go and together possibly some optional initial objectives and just let it evolve.
I love the progression. I think that's great. I mean, that last step though, can an AI system do the analysis like this? I mean,
that's the weakest part, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah,
because
because
try this.
yes, and you can also
Does it
import
work?
that from QA.
Okay.
It does. Well, I'm very honest when I talk about those things. I don't want to be too hyped. It works sometimes,
Yeah.
and I would say the more reliable way it works is that it provides some template and insight to human, and human edit from it.
Right.
It writes better than human, to be honest. And it surprisingly work very rare.
It's almost like a reflection step
Yes.
in the traditional loop.
Yeah.
And you said, did you mention they use the literature, scientific literature?
Yeah, it does access to everything, but I'm not sure, if it helps.
Well, it might do. I mean, like it might look in the literature. If you ask the analyzer, is there anything wrong with this? And then the system looks in the literature and says, oh, heavy ions are maybe a
Exactly.
problem in the past. Oh, there's heavy ions here. So
Yeah.
you could leverage
That's what we hope.
experience.
But I have to acknowledge that when we did this, we were doing it in academia, so we didn't have infinite access to GPTs and stuff. So many of the things we are not using the best models.
Okay.
Well, we use the best model, the coding models, but the rest we are not always using the best GPT models. Yeah. But
I'm a little bit still confused about the role of the optimizer and analyzer, because I think the way you explained it felt like the analyzer is actually doing 2 things together. One, it's also finding a solution or helping you to find a solution, and then it's also modifying the rubric, which is the job.
Oh, the optimizer is finding a solution. So optimizer you can just consider as an optimization algorithm. Given the objective, finding the
Right,
solution.
I understand that, but the kind of feedback, I don't know, maybe my interpretation is wrong. Going back to your earlier slide,
Sure.
I just feel like that you don't even need the optimizer. You could just have a language model as a proposer.
Good question. I have an argument for that. That's why I call it thinking fast and slow, right? So we can remove that loop. We can just put a language model there. We can do one step at this and then going forward. That's what humans do, arguably, right? But my point is that you have to see far enough to decide what in the higher level where the direction you want to steer at the objective space, right? If you only optimize a couple of steps, you don't see it into the extreme, the best that your optimizer can find. Then I think this is kind of the argument when you estimate a value function using Monte Carlo estimates versus just look ahead one step, right? So that's a similar argument.
Another question, like what stops analyzing? So let's say you did this loop once, like planner, implementer, optimizer, you got a solution which is 95% correct.
Sure.
And little bit of modification of that answer will give you the final answer. Let's say the gold answer, right? The best answer or whatever the discovery is. What stops analyzer to actually just propose that modification? Instead of adding to a rubric so that you have to still go through the optimizer rubric.
No, it won't. It's not like, okay, that's a very good point. So it's not additive. So it's not like you find a 95% good answer, you're just 5% close. You need to solve a different optimization algorithm. You need a different optimization landscape because the problem changes. You can consider there's one dimension you didn't observe before. Now you have an extra dimension you also need to optimize. If you initialize from what you solve like for 4-dimensional problem, well, now you have 5-dimensional space. You have some preference on that space. That could be a good initialization sometimes, but not always, right? So it might not guarantee you're close to the minimizer you're trying to find when you have extra dimensions.
So you get 95% of the problem, but the problem is actually not the right one.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very nonlinear. It could be very different.
How do you represent the objective? Do you have a list of features or?
Yeah. So you basically you have some like just verbally, just through, and
these have to be. I mean, your objective function has to be computational. You can't just have things like, it's you can't have synthesizable as a feature unless you can compute that.
Yeah, we do, but computational.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's nothing prevent you to connect it to the lab. But what I want to say is like humans are always fundamentally limited by what we can measure, right? So if we have experiment way to measure it, it still limits even if you put it into lab.
And do you find empirically? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you find empirically difference, like using the optimizer? Like, is there any value addition of having the optimizer compared to the language model as a proposer?
Yes, for sure. Using the optimizer itself. Using the optimizer, it was just like my previous argument, right? So you can start with a elastic algorithm for a molecule and start editing it through it, and that's kind of like some paper did it like TaxGrad or something like it, right? So optimizing prompt optimization, and we actually compare with the performance. The performance is horrible. Yeah. So you have to look at the extreme that you can find. You have a better estimate of your value function in some way that
I'm just curious, on your previous slide, it looked like your implementer was creating that scoring function, which I'm guessing you're using when you generate your final candidates and you say which ones are the best.
Implementer?
Yeah, so like it looked like the implementer was creating the scoring function.
Right.
And then so as you go through multiple rounds, can that implementer change the scoring function?
Oh, the planner decides what to change. Implementer is like it's a machine. It's just like planner tells implementer what objective to implement right there in the code, and planner decides, kind of like
But so like as you go through a second round of like the SAGA function, right? So that implementation could change, right? Like the planner could change that metric.
Right. That could change. It could partially change. You could use the implementer to change the weights of the objective. It could say, okay, let's try a different definition of drug likeness. It could change, but we'll save everything technically.
So how do you figure out like of your final candidates? Let's say on like the first round, you found a best candidate based on that objective, but now you've tweaked that objective, right? Changed the weights, and you have another set of candidates.
Right.
How do you say which one's the actual final? Do you do like an average over all your objectives? Do you only take the last one? Like, how do you know which one is actually the correct one?
Yes, great question. We only take the last one, but during our final, to get our final output candidates, we do an average over all the trajectories because stochastic helps, right? So but you do use the final set of objectives, but that was only for the system running. During evaluation, we have holdout evaluation metric. We have a much longer list of objectives that we evaluate. So we kind of like because we want to mimic this scenario, like I use this analog. It's like, in statistic discovery, why is you defined is like you have something above the iceberg that you can observe, and then after everything below the iceberg starts perfect. So it's amazing. But there are a lot of things, there are huge filter below the iceberg you're not observing. We are mimicking that. We have some initial objectives that we start with the loop, and it finds this objective, and based on that, it reports its final candidates. But we also have a hold down value, like below the iceberg. But of course, you can argue that why don't you start with those objectives initially, right? But we have to have a well-defined problem, like a Kaggle leaderboard. You have some, test set. We have like, I organize a huge team because I really want to see, if this is generalist, and we actually have 5 projects we did from antibiotic design, nanobody design, and they have very different representation of the structures. And but of course, in the end, all in text, DNA sequence and inorganic materials and chemical process. And there are many objectives we just show as example here. You do have a lot of objectives and a lot of things to tune in reality as scientists. And another thing I want to note here is like the goal is not entirely replacing scientists as I'm hinting, right? It's just like augmenting scientists and help it to do it offline to get those results. Okay, now I'm going to show you 2 examples here. So first is for antibiotic design. So what is the goal? So the initial goal is like design novel antibiotics, small molecules that are highly effective against this bacteria while maintaining good safety profiles and drug-likeness related properties. These are rather general. It doesn't tell you like what to really look for, right? You can start with some initial objectives. We start with the KP activity scores. We start with because it has to train over. You don't have a good predictor for this elsewhere. So you have some people from Broad Institute. They have some in-house data. They train a predictor. We have to train toxic predictors because that's also something we have to use their in-house data. And we thought those things you cannot really implement from internet or very challenging on this so far. So, and we formulate that held out evaluation metrics, which is around the 10 objectives that we will evaluate the final results to see how we're doing. And here's the performance. And I want to show is that there are 3 SAGA modes with copilot, semi-pilot, autopilot. But what I really want to show is like, and this is kind of obvious, right? So we call it SAGA opt, is that you just use your initial objectives, and you can see that the activities become high, but they are not like drugs. And there are also language model based like TaxBread and others. They are not even perform well on those activities themselves. As I said, that's very personal opinion is that I think they didn't look through enough. They didn't leverage the sampling capabilities while they're solving like optimization. Right? Sampling algorithm can be used to solve optimization problem. We know that when you anneal down the temperature to 0, the stochastic laundry one. But when you're solving optimization problem, you have like deterministic trajectories, and that's really high variance if you randomly initialize that. And so the performance wasn't so great, and you can see they are they capture the drug-like because some of them train on drug-like molecules, like natural LLM and MOT5. I believe they are not like large language models, but they're like autoregressive molecule language models. And but the activity is poor. And this is kind of obvious, but I just want to, for completeness, just show you do find useful objectives that you have to, right? But again, there's always this question: why don't you give it in the beginning? So, but that's kind of like out of the scope that we want to argue that you don't have them, right? So. And you can see, okay, what's happening? What are the objectives? What are the actions they are doing, right? So these sometimes adjust objectives. So for example, they add some synthesis-related scores. They add some penalties for some bad motifs. And those are very problem dependent. You have to see those bad motifs appear before you decide to add that penalties, right? And they also adjust the preference. They adjust the weights of the objectives. Well, this may, I think, to in terms of computer scientists, like a search optimization problem, the weights, the optimization landscape really matters, right? I have a very obvious example is that you have 3 objectives, sum them together versus you multiply them together. They have very, very different behaviors. And you also customize, as you say, as asked, like it sometimes modify the definition of certain objectives. And well, those are qualitative, of course, here. And what you can see is that, here, what are the planner decides to do? So initial objective is this specific to KP, and we need drug likeness. Of course, that's the first thing you would immediately do. And after that, it does realize, this KP activity and drug likeness has a negative correlation. And then you don't, in that case, you don't want it to be super like a drug. So that can become a filter instead of something to optimize. And language model realized that and does that. And the next iteration, it realized, there's some probably like functional groups that cause a metabolic stabilities, and then you kind of add some scores for that, so on, right? But again, these are just some cases that I want to show you how it works. And of course, when you evaluate those, we don't want to find no antibiotics. When you project those on space, you can see how it evolves, and so on, right? And another example, this is the last example I want to show, is that for inorganic material design. So here, the high-level goal is even simpler, like generate a set of chemical formulas for the crystals. Set of chemical formulas of crystals basically tells you the hypothesis space for permanent magnet materials with high magnetic density. Okay, so this was an example that we did this very much co-pilot, so you get more information. But okay, we did two study with the material discovery, and the first example we want to show. Okay, this may give some insight to the question that Woody just asked. Like, what if even if we just do the optimization, just have the optimizer itself, it actually already based on our generative models, you are trying to push on this direction. But the way we are doing it is not like giving two objectives at the same time, but first optimize like kind of like this iteration like this on this side on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis, and you get your final and the property target are kind of like the bottom right corner. And the reason why we studied this was because there was a Nature paper for it. It serves as a strong baseline that computational baselines. It's based on diffusion models. And what you can see is that when you evaluate things on quantum mechanical levels, because what we tested previously for both methods were like machine learning predictors. But now we want to see if that translates to more expensive calculation. And you do see with the same amount of budget, it finds more than the matter models. And what we test, okay, here is an example that we tested on where you don't give like a lot of information. So you want to generate a set of chemical formulas for super hard materials for ultra precision cutting tools. You have to tell it for what. Otherwise, you have to define for what first, and then define what objective construct that for what, right? So we can't give the information for what. And you can see, in this case, well, okay, we also compare with very well. I wouldn't call it AlphaEvolve really, but because AlphaEvolve have a lot of heuristics that specify towards the mathematical problems. But here is really just our base evolutionary algorithm, right? If you compare with them, just think about the optimizer, and those bars are basically different types of properties. And if you look at like AlphaEvolve and TechGrad, of course, if you cannot evolve objective, you cannot reasoning. Even if you gave them text prompt, they are language model. You may wondering if you're telling them the language model implicitly already consider them, right? But that's not as strong as we would have thought. And in this case, actually, the autopilot performed quite decent compared to the other two modes, compared to other scenarios. It's really based on scenarios as well, how much human are helping. And here are again the similar things. The objective is suggesting, and the preference is suggesting. Right? I want to fast go through this part because I have a last part I do want to share, but that's a short part. So I think we should be able to finish within time.
Yeah, I guess first of all, super impressive what the system is coming up with. But I'm trying to understand what are the key novel observations about the SAGA method itself. Can you describe how this compares to related work? Because there's been, I don't know, a dozen or more AI scientists now, and they oftentimes have this inner loop, outer loop, or use a React style,
Sure.
Or Magentic one-ish architecture. So your system seems very similar in that respect. What's
Yes.
different about your system that that makes it work well?
Yeah. So first, very nice observation. All the components you can find in the literature, right? But I would say the first immediate thought out of my head is like we came from a different way. The true difference is that we are not chasing for a fully automated AI scientist. We are going after what scientists do, and we build a workflow to boost that.
But there's been quite a few that put a human in the loop as well.
Okay, very good question again. The way that they do human in the loop is really treating language model as their collaborator, right? So when I do a step, I ask you to do a step, and then I give you feedback to do a step, right? So as I said, all the concept in this paper has been somehow realized, but that's the state of the affair in AI scientists, right? Because that's kind of like those are not like something super novel. That's very easy to come up with. But the core inside this is that we start with what scientists do, and we start with what scientists use optimization algorithm do to search hypothesis. And we ask the question, how do we add a little bit of automation to it? And then we realize this process that basically automates the scientist's day-to-day tasks is that I'm seeing the results, and I'm, instead of proposing a new hypothesis myself, I'm seeing the hypothesis based on some computational oracle that can give me the best, and I analyze the result and then refine, right? So it's kind of like yeah. I would say we are very different in implementation because we are not even anywhere close to a fully automated AI scientist or a chat-based AI scientist.
You got some impressive automated results here, though. I mean, you're treating the outer loop as kind of iterative refinement of an optimization function. That seems novel to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a different. Yeah, that's a place where we can claim some novelty. But I don't want to mislead everyone. There's a long way to go. The result was surprising sometimes, and it was it was above my bar to realize this, to see this potential as a computer scientist. I would be more confident saying we set out this holdout evaluation metrics, and we did improve results, get much better result in holdout evaluation metrics, recover some of the metrics. To that perspective, it was very impressive. But you say this, and we've been putting things into lab to test. But when you test things in that lab, also depends on what you test, right? To be very honest, there's still a way to go. And I think we possibly will get something passed, but that doesn't mean we are solving this problem. And there's still a way to go. So I want to clarify that, it may not be, well, it is impressive in an honest way instead of, I don't want to be too hyped towards this, because there are enough hype in the field that people were building startups around. The last part, okay, question? Oh, no, okay, go ahead. So, all right, I'll just quickly talk about the last part that I did, right? So I'm constantly reflecting on what scientific discovery should be formulated computationally. The previous question we were asking was like, is that a well-defined optimization problem? The next question I want to ask is it even an optimization problem? Because optimization, you're finding the global optimizer, right? So again, going back to this iceberg analog, so there are things we can measure, there are things we cannot measure. And SAGA pushed one step further. So basically, out of scientific intuition and the practicality on how to combine those things, we push one step further on this iceberg, right? To see more towards, but again, we are limited fundamentally by what even experimentally we can measure. So there are always dimensions we cannot measure, right? So this is a place we really need diversity, and we really need to evaluate them in the same way. And if you look at, okay, going back, this is more like algorithm, but that was the idea. So evolution algorithm that people are implementing, evolution, I like it. But I like it, but for the good and for the bad, right? So it doesn't provide pseudocode. So you can implement it whatever way you can, right? And the very natural way to do it is through this top K selection. And this just naturally rules out diversity. Because you're always keeping top K, keep going. And in evolution algorithm, the way people are doing it is through this island EA. And again, it doesn't provide a pseudocode. You can create many islands and communicate between the island when you search as much as you want. Right?
Okay, I'm lost. So you asked the question, is discovery an optimization problem? I'm not sure what the answer is. Obviously, defining the metric is a multi-objective utility function. But if you could define that function, maybe it is, I bet it is optimization. So I'm not sure where you stand on the answer to that question, but now you're moving into an evolutionary approach to solve that optimization problem, or?
No, let me clarify. Yes. So where I'm going is it's not an optimization problem because exactly we cannot define the exact objective we are chasing in reality. In the perfect sense, it is.
So what is it as a problem?
Right, that's a very good question. I'm not sure. I don't see an existing computational framework that realizes this realistic problem, right? So you can say it's an approximate sampling problem. You want to sample the diverse solution on the dimensions that we've seen, the objective you can define, right? You want to sample the entire or you find the right? So I don't. Yeah, that's a very good question.
So then I'm trying to figure out what makes a good solution there.
They have to be diverse. They have to be diverse in the unseen dimension.
So can't we specify that diversity criteria and try to optimize that? Isn't that what you're gonna do?
That
Your notion of optimization it's not a conventional machine learning optimization. You mean optimization in a very narrow sense.
yeah. I mean, optimization in a very narrow sense, right? So we can define diversity as a metric. Yeah, exactly. The point I'm trying to make is that what we are doing, we need diversity to hinge is that I cannot define a problem from its problem formulation, but I can define it from evaluation, right? So for example, let me break down what I mean evaluation. I have several objectives I want to optimize, and no matter what algorithm I have, I just find a global minimum. Like say, like combine this several objectives into one. I find the global minimum. But in reality, the goal of discovery problem is that you need to send that into lab, and there are many dimensions you are not seeing, right? But so the criteria, the final criteria is that if you have some observer objective and arbitrary unobservable objective, you need the diversity. For example, uniform.
Thanks.
I hope that clarifies a bit because I was short in time. I feel like I should. And okay. And then the transition, the reasoning I'm going here is that evolutionary algorithm that people are doing, like retrieval really creates like a lot of people got interest in those. But you know, I'm just presenting an approach to improve that, right? To take a sampling perspective because I study a lot of physical chemistry problems. I really love sampling and stochastics and stuff, right? So you can treat it as sampling from a Boltzmann distributions where you change your implementation of top K into sample K, for example, on different scenarios, and you can actually have very much better, more principled way to implement the multi-Allen evolutionary algorithm is that you can consider, this is a very common way tempering, right? So we have a tempered distribution where distribution much easier to explore, and I have a cold, like low temperature, it's very much easier to convergence. And the question I was trying to answer that gives you a more principled answer is that in multi-Allen EA, you may do this tempering or you may not. You just do the exact same but different replica, right? And you do some communication between staff. But how do you do the communication, right? There could be made more principle, and the way is through some very basic matrix testing algorithm, right? So the key I didn't show the math here, but the key insight is that you wanted the solution to you want to keep the solution at their fitting temperatures, right? You don't want to introduce a very bad sample into your code pool, which supposed to converge, or you don't want to. So that's the ratio that tells you in what probability you should do the swaps between the two pools, and it can be understood as an automated way to do multi-Allen EA if you're thinking about that's a solution to improve the diversity and exploration in evolutionary algorithm, and you take a sampling perspective. Now this is what I want to show. So when you talk about this, when you talk about the objectives, you have to talk about, you have two ways to think about. First is that you have to talk about how well you're optimizing your objectives constrained by the diversity of your solutions over your batch, for example. And you can see, if you just run evolutionary algorithm, if you now start constraining your diversity in your solution set, in your final set, like you return 50 solution in your final population, and it's much lower. It's actually, the score is much lower. Otherwise, this could go to 0.8. But if you start thinking about that, taking diversity into account, to select the candidate by diversity constraints, your score going down dramatically, right? Which also, if you look at the solution, you may basically find many things very similar and so on, right? So and they are all high score, and that takes your average of your 50 to 0.8. But if you really constrain them by diversity, it goes down a ton. And also another scenario is that you have to mimic this Asperger scenario if you really want to do something useful to reflect their use case in reality. Is that you optimize only one objective, but you have two other dimensions that you don't optimize. And when you evaluate the final objective score you have on that dimensions, you have some filters on the other two dimensions. You constrain that too. So you want real diversity that hinge against those things below the Asperger.
We're almost at time.
Yeah, that's my last stage. Yeah. So there are a couple of takeaways, like, scientific knowledge exists in language model, and I think search sampling are the way, and you can steer those with language model agent, and it's doable. And I think the question I'm really thinking about is like, what is the automation level we are aiming for? I'm always kind of like shooting from this bottom-up approach and building one more automation at a time. And yeah, and I think last question also maybe related to Peter's thoughts, like how do we evaluate those? People are really fascinated by the idea of fully automated AI scientists, but is that the right level of automation we should achieve, or how do we evaluate when we are there? Right. All right, that's it. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Well, we had some questions during the talk rather than at the end. Thank you everybody for being here. And as I say, Yanshi's around this afternoon as well. I think most of the slots are taken now, but if you